This is Unsiloed, brought to you by Alumni FM, connecting people through stories.
Welcome to Unsiloed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here with Charles Spence, who is a professor at Oxford University and who heads up the Cross-Modal Research Lab, which is sort of a branch of the psychology department, but it sounds like you guys have a lot more fun than a typical group of psychologists. And we're here to talk about his latest book, which is called Sensehacking. All right. Now, look, Charles has another fantastic book, which is called Gastrophysics. And I was planning on actually talking to you, Charles, about gastrophysics. And then I found out about this book. And so I had to, read this. And now this has got me bursting with so much interesting ideas. I thought maybe we could just talk about this for the next hour or so. Is that all right with you, Charles? Okay. So I'll tell you, it's not often that I encounter a book where I learn a whole bunch of new terms. So I'm just gonna rattle off some things that I read, terms that I saw in this book, some of which I'd heard before, but which I think most people in the audience may not have heard before. So in addition to sense hacking, you've got dopamine fasting, forest bathing, sensory congruence, biophilia. I've actually done another podcast on that. Humaneering, sensory superadditivity, sensory dominance, superadditivity, nature deficit, attention restoration therapy, sensory nudging, sensism. You talk about cognitive ergonomists. You talk about psychoacoustics. You talk about light hunger, sleep inertia, tactile contamination, and of course the Lynx effect, which I had never heard anything about the Lynx effect. So, you pack a lot into a really small book. And I was wondering, was this book something which you had in the back of your head kind of for a while, or is this something that, was COVID induced? Because, it's come out since you've been in quarantine.
Yeah. So maybe COVID finished, might be the term. I've been writing it for 2 or 3 years and striving to get enough time to finish the last couple of chapters. But COVID lockdown certainly helped with that. It curtailed all travel, conferences, and pretty much everything else. But the ideas behind the book, in a way, really go back to 2002, so almost 2 decades ago, when I wrote a big report for ICI, as was Dulux Paints, Quest Fragrance House, all part of the same organization, ICI, and sort of brought in to think about how the senses connect and how the senses can affect well-being in everyday life, for which that term sensism was coined. That was 2002, 2003, the ICI report on the secret of the senses came out. Since then, I kind of moved off into food and drink a lot more, hence the gastrophysics book you mentioned a little while ago. But over the last 2 or 3 years, I sort of come back to revisiting ideas around sensory well-being and how any one of us can kind of hack our senses in order to enhance our social, cognitive, emotional well-being. So it's sort of been in the head for 20 years. I've been sort of collecting evidence. How also, something was in fact, seeing how 20 years ago, probably the term forest bathing had been mentioned by somebody somewhere, but people were a bit skeptical about it. Maybe they're still a bit skeptical about it. But certainly in these last 20 years, it's nice to see how many of the areas that are covered back in 2003, how much more research has come out on the benefits of the nature effect, biophilia and so on pheromones and touch hunger. Many of these themes, many of these sort of deficits, I think, that we face in daily life are ones that have probably been exacerbated by the COVID lockdown, and hence I think sort of timely, though also a little tricky when we're just finishing up the book to know quite where we'd be kind of a year later from when I handed in the last chapter. Would COVID be long forgotten? Would it still be with us? And hence you're trying to think about how to frame parts of the book, given on how you guess the world might turn out.
Well, let me go back in time a little bit, because this is kind of an unusual role that you have. Whenever I pop over to the psychology department to listen to talks and so forth, you've got your vision people, you've got your hearing people, you've got your smell people. I mean, there's not a lot of them, but you've got some smell people. And, there's a lot of touch people. I know here at Berkeley, we've got some touch people. But you rarely meet somebody who is thinking more broadly about the entire portfolio of senses. And so, what I found interesting about your work is not only that you dove into all of these individual sensory experiences, but you talk a lot about kind of sensory congruence and, mismatches between the senses. And so how did you ever academically convince, Oxford to allow you to be this kind of sense generalist as opposed to, being this narrow, very, very, specialized sense person?
Well, I think we get a pretty loose rein in Oxford, maybe elsewhere, to sort of pursue our own interests in the belief that we have a good sense of where interesting problems lay, where our skills can help us to address some of those interesting issues. I think that the notion of kind of individual sensory experts, the vision scientists, the hearing scientists, the touch scientists, the smell and taste, as you mentioned, that is very much traditional view, sort of built on the feeling that the brain's such a complicated thing. We couldn't possibly understand what's going on. Why not break it down into smaller bits, into simpler bits, like just vision, just hearing. And as I mentioned in the book, when I started in Oxford back in 1997 as teaching, there was a vision guy, there was a hearing guy, and they hadn't spoken to each other for decades, literally. We'd had some falling out, some departmental meeting, and just refused to be in each other's presence. But the really surprising thing was that it didn't feel like they felt they were missing anything, that the person who was interested in the eyes and in vision, what could they learn possibly of interest to you about hearing? It's almost entirely separate sensory worlds. And what we've seen changing over the last 20, 25 years is really for the next generation, I think, of younger, which I was once, perception scientists who are really interested in combining the senses. On the one hand, because they realize, that we don't live in a unisensory world. We're always taking in inputs from different senses and combining them. And also because I think there's so much stuff to be done in the multisensory field, because so few people have thought about it previously, that, there's a lot of opportunity to do interesting new research in a way that, some of those individual sense studies, it's much harder to find something that a bit of ground where nobody's been before. So I'm really part of a wave, I think, of the young scientists who are fascinated by the way the senses connect. Some of the surprising ways, in fact, and that's some of those terms you mentioned: the superadditivity, the subadditivity, the sensory congruence, the sensory dominance. These are some of the surprising ways the senses interact. And I think it's really important to think about how the senses interact, because it's clear that they don't always just add up in a kind of 1+1 way, and hence what finds many people thinking about the senses in everyday life, sensory marketeers, for example, who maybe have been encouraged to think about smell for the first time, an extra sense, but haven't really thought about how the senses connect, and that can lead to all sorts of problems if you're not careful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you talk about some others like seasickness or car sickness, right? Where there's a kind of a divergence between what you're feeling and what you're seeing, maybe, or you talk about when there's a really bad voiceover, and so what you hear doesn't line up with what you see in the movement of the lips, and then how you can actually use this congruence to heal things like phantom limb syndrome and so forth. Why do you? I mean, is this an area of study that you think is just going to expand and get greater? Trying to put all these pieces together. I mean, we always talk about the difference between generalists and specialists, and there's a back and forth between the two.
I think it's clear that most of our experiences, especially the most pleasurable experiences in life, are multisensory, engage many of our senses. Be it food, be it sex, be it whatever, shopping. And hence, I think you can't just try to stick your head in the ground and say, this is all too complicated to think about how all the senses interact, that you need to be aware of the interactions, because they're always there. And sometimes, it's things that we're aware of, but other times it can be sensory cues that we're not really aware of in the background, like the smell of our own home. I give us the example as we start the book, the smell that has surrounded so many of us while we've been locked down in our own home for so many months. The smell that's so familiar that none of us recognize it, except when we come back for a long holiday and suddenly open the door and there's that smell there. And we know everybody else's home smells, but we rarely realize our own home smells. And the question of what that might be doing to our emotional well-being, to our stress levels, especially when combined with lighting, music, and with touch, or the lack thereof, the touch hunger. So I think it's just going to grow and grow, and there's clearly more interest from sensory marketeers, for those working in branding, from those working in healthcare. You have a chapter on multisensory hospitals, and there's clearly a great opportunity to enhance the offering in a whole range of sectors, from the workplace to the gym, to the hospital, to the home, by considering the senses and making sure that they kind of tell a congruent story without overloading us.
Well, I want to, the subtitle of your book is How to Use the Power of Your Senses for Happier, Healthier Living. And yet a lot of the research that you mentioned was driven by, companies that are trying to basically sell stuff, right? You talk about how the car companies would research the sound of the engines and the sound of the doors shutting, and the manufacturers of coffee machines and refrigerators will think about, how they sound. And yet this kind of sense hacking seems like the kind of hacking that we don't like, right? Is this book kind of like because you work with a lot of these companies, is there a divergence at any point between the sense hacking for good and kind of sense hacking for commercial commercial profit?
So it's certainly true that the cross.
I mean, is this a mea culpa book? It's like, yeah, I've worked to help sell all this stuff, and now I'm going to help you.
I'm very open about the fact that the cross-modal research lab where I'm based at Oxford is quite unusual, in that most of our funding over the last 25 years has come from industry, from a whole range, from car companies, work with Toyota and BMW, through home and personal care, food and drinks companies, pharmaceuticals, and so on and so forth. And sometimes there can be a sense that, if they're paying for the research, then they're trying to manipulate us, make us, as you say, maybe buy more, spend more, spend different. And while that is potentially possible, I think the insights that have come out of that research, those insights are really about how the sounds, the smell, the sight, the feel of an environment can affect us in various different ways. Those insights, that's just sort of knowledge. That's not really positively or negatively balanced, good or bad. It's just knowledge. And it's clear that perhaps some of the companies may use that knowledge to their advantage. Whether that's against what the consumer wants, I'm not so sure. I think very often the idea is to try and enhance the retail environment so that people will spend more time there because they are happier there. And if they're happier there, then they may spend more. But it's not really targeting some secret buy buttons that, just if you can get the combination right, you just spend. It's sort of really maybe mediated through an enhanced experience. But those insights, I think, are just insights about senses, their impact and how they combine. And those insights can be used by any one of us to help improve our own well-being and to analyze the sorts of things that may be going on around us that we didn't realize. And it could be, maybe I've been lucky, but certainly we've tried to publish as much of the research as we can. It's been funded by industry, so it is out there in the public domain. Everybody could use it. And by going through the kind of the situations of everyday life in sense hacking, looking from the home to the work, to commuting, to the garden, to the gym, to the hospital, to the sleep, to dating. The idea is that you just sort of show people how they could potentially use those insights themselves and the sorts of benefits they that might ensue, sort of problems that might help to address. And so in that sense, it is, trying to put all the information in the hands of the average person. But for me, it's kind of it. I think well, it might not seem obvious, to me it sort of feels like a natural progression from the gastrophysics, and almost there in the gastrophysics, I was looking at how everything around the food can affect the food, from the lighting, the music, to the cutlery, to the weight. And now it's almost like putting a person in place of the food, and all of the same sort of factors probably affect us in the same way that they affected the food. It's just easier to sometimes study food as a medium. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when we think about companies like Facebook that, they're interested in promoting engagement. They're interested in creating customer loyalty. They're interested in getting customer stickiness and so forth. And I think sometimes they, we have to learn what makes things sticky and what makes things seductive, so that we can decide, for ourselves how much we want to engage. On that point, you mentioned at the very beginning of the book that, some of us in today's world might be overstimulated. Our senses might be bombarded by, a lot of sensory overload. And yet at the same time, there may be members of our society, particularly elderly people, who are experiencing some kind of sensory underload. Do you think that do you think that there's sensory therapy is going to be a new occupation where we can kind of engineer the sensory environment in ways that, as engineers, to optimize the sensory experience, and come up with some kind of diagnostic as to what our sensory experiences are like?
Indeed, I think that's definitely possible, and probably already happening, in fact. So I do sort of draw this distinction at the beginning, as you mentioned, between looking at sensory overload that many of us report and complain about on a daily basis, of too much information, too much noise, too many alerts, too many messages, too much going on. But also, when you sort of drill down into it, very often you find that it's an overload of kind of rational, higher senses of seeing and hearing, senses that can be more easily stimulated by digital technologies. Well, on the flip side, you find very few people who say, hold on, it's got too much touch going on, but too many smells, too many tastes. You just don't find people complaining about stimulation, overstimulation, I think, of the more emotional senses. So I think, rather than thinking about this sort of just that we are sensory overloaded, I think it's more about a sensory balance. And that sensory balance is important because by neglecting our more emotional senses, and now I'm thinking, of touch and of smell and of taste. By neglecting what is our biggest sense, the skin, and all the tactile receptors therein, and so like 16 to 80% of body mass is your sense of touch. I think it's really important to make sure that those senses are stimulated, because they can convey perhaps more easily emotional benefits than can the higher senses. I think you see, I borrow the term from Tiffany Field, a touch researcher from the States, who's talked a lot about touch hunger, and how in contemporary society, many of us, either for fear of litigation or because we just don't like touching old people, there's a lot less touch, interpersonal touch, than perhaps there was. We see people almost self-medicating to try and engineer a better sensory mix for themselves, be it by all the massage toys and chairs that you can buy at stores like the Sharper Image, be it all the sort of aromatherapy and massage therapy as a way of bringing touch back. And that's one of the areas, in fact, where compared to when I wrote the Sensehacking report back in 2003, we know so much more about, say, the stimulation of the skin than we did 20 years ago. And that, 2003, the idea that, massage was, that we needed to stimulate the skin, didn't really ring true. It's more like a luxury than a necessity. But now, 20 years later, there's a lot more evidence of the pleasure receptors in the skin and the benefits cross species of the sort of pleasant tactile stimulation. From touch through to sound to vision. I think there really is a sense of trying to engineer the environments in which we inhabit, which for most of us, according to the statistics, as urban dwellers, spending 90 to 95% of our lives indoors, already becomes a question of how to modify or to engineer control sensory environments such that they deliver on that sort of social, emotional, and cognitive well-being, perhaps by recognizing the problems of light hunger for those in northern climates, not really enough natural light, so spending so much time indoors in the winter months, be it maybe a lack of variation in the kinds of stimulation we get, be it, you see, it's got to be interesting, as you mentioned, in sort of biophilia and of trying to bring nature into the built environment, be it in the home, be it in the office, be it in the hospital. It clearly can have beneficial effects. And that is really kind of a perceptual engineering to optimize stimulation, perhaps matching it to the kinds of environments we have evolved in. And that might involve, bringing greenery and water, the sounds of the birds and the animals. It might even be, this is one of the amazing things that popped out of the book was, when researchers studied indoor temperatures of homes in North America, from Alaska to Texas, and from the warmest to the coldest states, they find that everyone seems to set their sort of central heating, air conditioning at 23 degrees centigrade and at a humidity level, that if you compare that to the climate in every region on Earth, it turns out it provides a closest match for the Ethiopian highlands where we evolved. So it's almost like we're trying to recreate the temperature and humidity that we're familiar with such a long time ago. Amazing, but I think that sort of idea of bringing nature into the built environment is very powerful when it is kind of perceptual engineering. It is clearly demonstrably improving health and well-being in a variety of ways. And I think as we move forward, may increasingly involve, almost kind of a bit more of a sort of dynamic change. If one thinks about where I am here in Colombia, in the middle of nature, then you're very aware of the changing kind of sensory profile over the course of the day. How, the world sounds a lot louder 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning with the birds. It's fragrant at certain times of the day. And those sort of temporal variations of the outdoor environment tend to be lost in the kind of static indoor environments that we built for ourselves. And then so it's a really important role to try and perhaps have more dynamic environments and really to question. And there's what I've been, a couple of my latest articles have been about really to question the architects, say, what responsibility do they have for the light hunger, for the sick building syndrome, for all of those working in open plan offices and so much noise that they really can't concentrate, with restaurants that are so loud. I think when you think more carefully, and to do that, we need to almost start by realizing how much our environment affects us through each and every sense. How if we put ourselves in environments where the different senses are telling an incongruent story, where maybe the scent in the store or shopping mall or the home is alerting, but the music is relaxing, it can be really hard for us, or consumer, to resolve what's going on, what that environment means. And so hence that question of congruency keeps coming up again and again. And almost how I was just on a conference call with a colleague a couple of days ago who's an architect working on biophilic design, and how most of the plants that he brings into offices are all kind of tropical plants that we find here in the garden in Colombia, but he's bringing them into office environments in the UK. So that's kind of incongruent in some way to have tropical plants in the British environment. We have the plants, but you don't really have the sounds or the smells of nature that go with those plants. It gives them incongruence in a different way. And I think there are also interesting questions there about when and how congruence is important, and which elements of nature can we bring into the built environment to improve our well-being. And in fact, ultimately, can we do better than just simply bringing a few pot plants into indoors? Can we actually create an environment that is better, it's almost like caricatured, or better than nature, if we understand really what it is about the natural environments that is having such an impact on us.
And throughout the book, you kind of make reference to evolutionary psychology, and you kind of, sometimes the explanations are just those stories. Sometimes there seems to be more solid foundation for the explanations. Has evolutionary psychology been helpful to you in trying to get to the heart of why people react the way they do to these environmental cues?
I think it provides one kind of sort of potential explanation. But I think evolutionary psychology sometimes it can be just they're just so stories that can be very hard to prove. But I think that's a more general point of that we may have evolved within particular environments, and that recreating in some part those environments that have been lost through contemporary architecture and changes in sort of patterns of living is an interesting idea, and seems to make predictions and support a lot of the emerging research on the benefits of sight, sounds, and smells of nature. And for me, it's always I think it works there, as well as in sort of our work on food and our use of herbs and spices in cooking too. I've been drawn to this evolutionary psychology accounts of the role that such spices may have played once for a time in the killing parasites and such like before we had fridges. So I think time ahead, one has to be a little bit skeptical, a little bit cautious about accepting everything the evolutionary psychologists might put out there. It does provide a framework. It does seem to make some sensible, logical predictions and provide a grounding for the growing number of psychologists now and practitioners who are interested in biophilic design. And for me, that's very often tends to focus on the visual, because we are visually dominant creatures. But I think equally important are the roles of the sounds of nature and the congruency between what we see and what we hear. I mean, here in Colombia, it's been very nice while they've been here during COVID lockdown, because the airport's been mostly closed in Bogota. And even though we're 40 kilometers away, we still get one of the flight paths for Bogota Airport, El Dorado, and we get planes, so Anthropocene noise every 5 minutes, day in, day out, day and night, and that sort of disappeared. I think there really is a question about how detrimental the noise of engines and motors and planes and motorbikes and traffic is, or can be for us, and how they can obviously eliminate the beneficial effects of seeing or being in nature. And for me, I wonder whether ultimately we can extend this revolutionary account and say, if being in touch with nature is a good thing, well, we can be in touch, we can see nature, we can hear nature, but we can also smell nature. And so maybe that whole literature on aromatherapy and the use of essential oils, of fragrant plants and fruits and herbs, maybe that's almost, you can reframe it as smelling nature. So is aromatherapy really kind of the olfactory nature effect? And if so, maybe it provides a grounding for why exposure to certain ambient odors should be beneficial in terms of relaxing us or alerting us.
Well, it seems like, with COVID, a lot of the non-pharmaceutical interventions that have been kind of imposed on people as a way of impeding the spread of the virus may have had some negative consequences for people, in particular, people being contained indoors and limited in their ability to get out and about. And the percentage of time spent indoors may have actually increased for many people during COVID. Do you see this forced removal from nature as something, as a potential problem that people have had to go through over the last year?
I sort of imagined initially that maybe people were spending more time indoors as a result of COVID, but the statistics going back 20 years will say that the urban dwellers, we spend 95% of the time indoors already, so that we can't really get any higher than that. So what I think what COVID might have done is actually sort of,
and some of us might be spending more time outside.
What COVID might have done is sort of reduce the variability or the variance or the range of environments, indoor environments we're exposed to. It's mostly going to be the home environment. I think I'll be sort of keeping a record both on the one hand of the increase in touch hunger, because people can't touch anymore, or the kind of care home residents in the UK who say, who can sort of see on occasion their relatives through the glass, and they can speak to them through the intercom, but they're not allowed to touch in person, fear of transmitting the disease. And these, heartbreaking stories of these elderly individuals saying, all I want to do is just give my family a hug. And what clearer message could you have about benefits of touch and the need and the increasing touch hunger that we're faced with? And in a way, in terms of nature, what struck me was during, at least I think, the first lockdown or two, this thing seems to have changed with each subsequent lockdown, at least here in the UK, was how many journalists were kind of commenting on sounds of the birds that they could hear for the first time when there's no traffic. We experienced that with my wife and I in Oxford, near Port Meadow, big floodplain. On the far side of it is the ring road around Oxford City. And normally it's just a constant drone of noise, but there's virtually no traffic for 4 or 5 months. And suddenly silence, and suddenly you can hear far more of the birds. And so, ironically, in a way, maybe COVID has actually either brought us closer to nature or made us more aware or allowed us to hear nature in a way that we were sort of masked before by all of that kind of urban noise. And maybe a sort of value, maybe it's a sort of value nature, and a more, when it's taken away from us, and when, we're only allowed to go out once a day, as we were in the UK, then you can make sure to do so in a way that you might not have done if you hadn't had a restriction put on you.
Well, one of the things that I think a lot of people have done is they've paid a lot more attention to their home environment, and home improvement projects have taken off, and it's very difficult to find a contractor, I think, during COVID. In your book, you spend some time talking about environments like stores and hospitals, and work environments that an individual might not have a whole lot of control over, but we do have quite a bit of control over our own homes and maybe our own gardens and bedrooms and dining rooms and kitchens. Could you give us, I found this extremely interesting and useful information in terms of how to engineer each of those spaces to achieve the desired results. Right in the bedroom, you want to sleep. In the dining room, you want to enhance the culinary enjoyment and community with your co-diners in the kitchen. You want to certainly have a kitchen that's helpful to the cooking process. What are some of the insights that you found most interesting? I have my list of interesting insights, but which ones did you find super useful for your own kind of home design?
For me, when I was researching how to sort of sense hack sleep or the bedroom, that was the one that had the strongest or most profound effect on me. So I had been one of those sort of individuals who would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and sleep 4 hours or 6 hours. I think that was all fine. And I was struck by reading literature about how detrimental to our health and well-being.
Yeah. So Matt Walker's,
for example.
You read Matt Walker's book, yeah.
And the temptation, and I about myself years ago, was to, if you can't sleep, then take some sleeping tablets, use sort of pharmacological intervention. That tends not to be the right kind of, doesn't deliver the right kind of sleep to help restore individuals. So I was really struck by how, in some cases, patients who've been in long-term use of sleeping tablets, if you take them off the sleeping tablets and instead you use the scent of lavender, you can actually increase the right sort of sleep through the sort of sensory intervention more effectively than through a sort of pharmacological one. I think about in the kitchen. I really worry a lot how, for many people, whether or not we're in COVID, when we're at home, kind of the kitchen, dining room has become kind of the center of many of our homes. When kitchens used to be things just locked away, hidden away, that you wouldn't really spend much time in. Now the families seem to spend much of their time, social time together in that kitchen space. That's fine. Maybe explains why we're spending so much more on their home renovations and home kitchens than ever before. But at the same time, I do worry that if we spend so much time in kitchens, then does that mean that we're being surrounded by the aromas of food, by the sight of food? And if so, I think we are, then that's probably something we should worry about, given all the research saying that very often our decision to eat is driven by sensory cues, by the smell of food or by the sight of food. Maybe we should be a bit more careful about either removing some of those almost continuously available food smells and sights from the places where we spend so much of our time. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to confess that after I read the book, I immediately ordered some lavender for myself for my bedroom. So I'll report back whether I see any improvement or not. But you also talk about different work environments, and I've taught a class on the workplace, and I've noticed that companies like Gensler and Steelcase and sort of HR departments at large companies like Google and Facebook, they're taking a big interest in in the work environment. Used to be you just try to jam as many people in as to this open environment and cut down on your real estate costs, and now, because employees are so expensive, it really does make a huge difference if there's any kind of problem with the lighting or problem with the noise pollution. Do you think that employers and people who are in charge of these work environments are starting to take seriously the work around workplace design? Are you seeing this? Are you seeing this happen in real time?
Yes, albeit slowly. But I think maybe obviously sort of trends in workplace design come and go as trends do. I think there's always that sort of push to put people in the open plan offices, makes more space more flexible, saves on costs. And yet, the research says, workers lose almost an hour a day from distraction by noise from other people that they can hear in those sort of open plan offices. And with kind of COVID, there is a debate ongoing just how many workers, after having spent a year or so possibly working from home, will people go back to working in offices or not? And if the employer wants the workers to go back, there's going to be an inertia there. People got so used to perhaps working from home that many of them might need an extra push in order for them to want to return to the office. Not all, but some. And hence that might help to speed up or to accentuate the need to kind of make environments that are more welcoming and that are potentially more productive. That can be either environments that reduce sick leave and various cognitive or well-being problems from being in sort of unhealthy spaces. At the extreme, somewhere like sick building syndrome was very popular a few decades ago, from these kind of buildings without natural ventilation, lots of volatile organic chemicals in the air. Through the sort of emergence of the biophilic design and of the kind of greening the offices that have been sort of championed, as you say, by I guess the likes of Facebook and so on. But Amazon HQ, I mentioned in the book, where it's more like a greenhouse up in Seattle than a head office. It seemed like we had 30,000 plants. But of course, most other companies couldn't afford, I suppose, to invest that much in the shrubbery. But I think that there is a growing awareness. I mean, it's fine to say, okay, yes, we should all, be working in offices that are green with the sound of water tinkling away in fountains and so on and so forth. That's, of course, got a cost attached. And so it's only going to stick, I suppose, if we have the evidence to say this is, financially sensible strategy that by biophilically designing your office, for example, you can reduce sick leave, you can improve productivity, and hence the costs associated with these interventions and making the environment more sensory appealing are worth it in the long run. But in fact, now there are a few studies that have been, one nice study done in the UK and in the Netherlands that I mentioned in the workplace chapter, that it's a carefully controlled study in a or a sort of office/hall claims center, and they greened one floor but not the other floor, and vice versa, nicely controlled, and were able to demonstrate, that the workers were significantly more productive in green environments.
Just the green versus lean, right? Green
Without
versus
evidence
lean.
in hand, then maybe there's a hope that these kind of inventions will not only be the preserve of the kind of Silicon Valley type companies, but may be extended more broadly, and especially maybe we may think about the kinds of tasks that are involved, and maybe perhaps the environment has a bigger impact, on those and for creative industries than in certain others. And certainly my own building in Oxford, where the psychology department was closed down with asbestos 3 years ago. So talk about a sick building. That is, we have seen the architect's plans for the new building stay up, the Life and Mind building, in the next 2 or 3 years. And from all the architect's plans, you can see the emphasis on natural light, big windows, and also kind of greenery in the central space. So that's one example where some of these ideas have been taken up.
Now, in architects tend to favor the visual. I mean, you mentioned we're predominantly visual creatures, and architects will, they draw buildings, they make maquettes, the documents that they produce are primarily about the visual appearance of the space, either from the inside or from the outside. But in your work, you continually emphasize that that's only really one part of the whole experience. And in marketing, we talk about in-store displays and we talk about shelf placement, but you talk a lot about how the smells can drive outcomes at least as much as the visual. You talk a lot about music, and how music is one of the most profound sensory experiences and can have the biggest impact. Should we be talking about sound architects and smell architects? Do architects need to go back to school to really, relearn this, or is this always going to be something that's kind of like an add-on to what the architects do?
So I have in fact just published a couple of papers in Architectural Digest or Design and the Psychology Journal. It's all about multisensory architecture. So obviously after having finished writing the book, I've got to be thinking much more about the implications and repercussions of that primarily visual design amongst architects. And I think it's not too much to talk about.
I mean, as far as I know, like Autodesk software, whether it's Revit or CAD, there's no way to design the smell of the environment in that software, as far as I know.
Yes, there have been a number of buildings that have been given signature scents. Some of those appears a little bit mysterious to the general public's. The Barclays Stadium in New York was one that when it was opened in 2013, commentators will say it's got a very distinctive smell in the space and probably deliberately introduced. Can go back to the 1910s and find cinemas in Germany that were pumping out the fragrance from fragrance fountains and sort of blips in the air over the auditorium. Those apartments were sold in Miami a year or two ago that have its own distinctive, its own bespoke fragrance. Now, these are all just isolated examples thus far, but I think there are a growing number of them. They're also supported by a growing range of scent-emitting technologies. Of course, the old school way might just be to have a bunch of flowers on the counter in the store. But what is so noticeable to me is that when I've been on some store audits and store visits with some corporate clients in London over the last few years, walking down Regent Street, and every store has a scent. Something you might expect it to have, but many that you don't. Sort of bag stores, sort of smell of leather, and denim stores that have scents being pumped out of the air conditioning. So there's a much more widespread use of scent in retail, certainly, facilitated by its great awareness, its impact, and the technological availability. And I think that will continue to grow. I think in terms of sound design as well is, of course, music can play a role, but also the sounds of nature are being put in, whether it's the sounds of trickling water in the plan office to mask out other people's conversations, the sound of the tropical rainforest that they used to pump out in Glasgow Airport, be it the nature sounds you get in car sales rooms and elsewhere. But here, I mean, I was in Colombia, and my father-in-law passed away 2 years ago now. Ricardo, he was an architect, and he built the house in which me and my wife stayed here while I'm on sabbatical. I'm sort of very interested to think about him and why this was such a special place for him, surrounded by nature, with fountains and water trickling. And we are, as we're here for a few months, I've been deliberately introducing kind of musical waterfalls surrounding the house by the Caballero de Noche, that's sort of night flowering jasmine, to have the scent, introducing lots of color. And so I think once you become aware of how you can design for all the senses, then it's something that it can be simple for any one of us to do. And we'll talk about, of gustatory architecture. The taste of architecture might be a bit much. One can find here and there architects who say, that marble was just so delicious, I just had to lick it.
One thing what I've learned is that for my dining room, at least, I need heavy cutlery, and I need a round table, and I need a tablecloth to optimize the experience of my diners.
That's right. Of course, I guess for dining, some of us, we like to create the best meal possible, maybe the stickiest memories of, where family dinner party. For others, it may be, what can I do to my own kitchen to help me eat less? Well, not always feeling hungry. Yes.
One thing that drives me nuts is I cannot stand scented candles or heavily perfumed people at my meals. that kind of drives me.
Yeah, as it used to do for the.
But this is a matter of life and death, right? I mean, this may be a matter of life and death. So what kind of due diligence should we do before we go into the hospital for surgery? Should we find out what kind of music the surgeon's listening to? What kind? Should we make sure that we have some nice greenery outside of the window,
room, or pictures of nature, or art? Yes, all of the above. So this idea of sensory design in healthcare is an area that's exploding over the last few years. Almost what I think, we've had a lot of research on kind of multisensory design of retail spaces. Now in healthcare, there's a growing awareness and growing competitiveness in some parts, especially the States, in sort of the healthcare provision, that it's got a realization needs to go beyond just the machines or what they can do, and the doctors and surgeons, but actually think about designing environments that are conducive to recovery, to a reduction of stress. And that can be everything from the scent on the one hand. You just think about, when you go to the dentist and you get the smell of eugenol, the clove smell of fillings, that could, for most of us, make us really pretty tense. That's not an intrinsically sort of stressful smell. It's just when we associate that smell with what's going to happen, and sort of the pain and the drilling and so on. I think probably the same thing for hospitals. The scent may be making it stressful. Clearly, there's a huge problem with noise in many hospital wards, especially in the open and public wards in the UK, with more than 100 decibels of noise, far above the kind of international recommendations. That is reducing patients' ability to sleep, clearly. And if they don't sleep, then they're less likely to take longer to recover. And beyond that, so we're thinking about how to reduce noise from all the beepers and buzzers and alarms reflected off all those hard surfaces. I think this idea of sort of music in medicine is one that appears in the healthcare chapter, but also written separately with my colleague Steve Keller. And that question you ask of, should you ask what your surgeon's going to listen to? Most striking is bizarre. Who would have thought that the surgeons listen to music while they operate on you? But the majority do. And there is research out there showing that certain kinds of music can enhance the quality of stitches that surgeons make, and hence music may affect both the performance of the operating staff, but for you personally, hopefully, when you're being operated on, you're out, so you can't hear any of that. But what you can hear is both throughout the surgery, music can be useful to help relax people, and thereafter, amazingly, you can use music in place of painkillers in some cases. So various groups of patients have been shown to be able to or require less medication, less painkillers, if provided music that they help them to relax. So I think it's a really important role for music throughout our interaction with sort of the healthcare system. And it's probably going to lead, I wonder, or I give the example of Brian Eno, who in British hospital sort of created music for those who are coming to terms with grief. But one might think, are we at a point where we're going to start to design, either create music specifically for medical purposes, or think about curating the kind of the Spotify playlist for hospital patients or the visitors. May not be too far away, because it does kind of have a profound effect. It's really been studied most thoroughly in healthcare. But also, of course, affects us when we're shopping, when we're out dining, and when we're in our home.
Well, I found a lot of insight with respect to the shopping experience, with respect to the driving experience, with respect to, my home and work environments. And maybe some people aren't interested in any of that. Maybe they'll just want to buy the book because of your insights on dating. So that's and I'm wondering, with the rise of online dating, where people are just swiping left and right after, 2 or 3 maybe less than a second of visual stimulation. Is this having a radical impact on people's experience of romance, by putting so much emphasis on the visual? We all know that smells and sounds and, all these other senses, have historically played a huge role in, mate selection. And it seems like they're being kind of pushed aside in favor of this purely visual filtration process.
In terms of that sort of first judgment call, then is primarily visual. That, I guess that doesn't mean you can't still do a bit of sense hacking, even if you only got a picture to go on. So as I point out in the book, when you're thinking about which of your picture-owned photos should you put up there on the dating site, you may not be the best judge of which pictures look most attractive. So the evidence research suggests you'd be best asking some of a few of your friends to pick your picture for you. So I'll pick a more attractive one, generally attractive. One might also think about there's research suggesting that if you have a picture of yourself, holding a musical instrument, something like a guitar, that seems to make you more attractive to the opposite sex. And also some research around the power of wearing red or of holding something red. Some debate in the literature, but certainly enough evidence for me to be forever wearing my red trousers, and holding a red computer bag, say, or even the background against which you're presented in a picture can influence others, both in terms of how aroused they might be. And one of my favorite examples in the dating chapter, are about the classical studies where people will be asked for a date after or while they're on a wobbly kind of rope bridge, or after coming off a fairground ride, where we sort of misattribute our arousal from the bridge or the fairground ride and think that must be the other person who's doing that to us. And if I'm feeling so aroused, they must be really attractive. So let's go on a date. So that's going to be hard to capture, I guess, in purely visual domain. But, ultimately, most romance progresses from purely visual into the multisensory domain when people meet. And so there are questions there about the importance of the sound or of touch or of a person's smell. And whether each of our senses actually tells us something different. Is somebody's visual attractiveness correlated with how attractive their voice sounds, or are they entirely independent things? But it turns out there is some relation there, through to kind of some of the amazing research coming out suggesting that your smell, be it your natural odor albeit your choice of perfume, sort of different amongst different individuals, may actually be helping to kind of advertise your particular immune profile and how your body smell. From that, if I just give you somebody else's t-shirt, you can predict reasonably well their age, their health status, emotional stress, even some of their sort of personality dimensions are kind of available through smell. And it's that sort of power of smell that makes me really worried. Some of the things that we don't realize that we've lost through COVID. And I really think, wearing face masks is going to reduce our ability to smell others. Another thing that we all do, most of us, at least when we meet somebody else, we shake hands, or for France, we may give a French kiss to either cheek of the person we've met. And if you observe people who've just shaken hands with somebody else, within a minute, they all sniff their fingers. None of us realize we do it, but if you observe as a psychologist what people do, within a minute of shaking hands with somebody, we all sniff off our fingers. And from that, we're obviously getting some kind of information about the other person. It's also happening subliminally, but in this world where we elbow bump rather than shake hands, we've lost a key source of olfactory information about others. And that may, I think, lead to impaired social judgments, because the more cues we have about somebody's sound, their smell, what they look like, the better judgments we can make about the appropriateness of a match. And also maybe an increasing feeling of alienation if we're no longer able to get those subtle social smells from others, the smells we didn't realize were there, the smells that we didn't realize we were picking up, but which are always there in the background, kind of processed subconsciously and part of our experience and part of our emotional connection and part of, this sort of sensory imbalance that we have faced for a long time, in some cases has been made worse by the COVID restrictions.
That's probably, I think, the scariest thing for me about the risk of getting COVID is the loss of smell, which I think has been shown to be the loss of that smell seems to have the biggest impact of all this, of all the other senses in terms of leading to depression and suicides, from what I've read.
Right. And then when you ask people, which sense would you least like to lose? We all say our eyes. No one thinks about, twice about losing sense of smell. And yet when you look at some suicide reports, everyone from Michael Hutchins from InXS, who lost his sense of smell after a street brawl, committed suicide a little thereafter. The suicide rates are highest or very high after loss of sense of smell, presumably because it takes away that emotional connection with the world. And then while those who lose their sight can sometimes still imagine from the sound of their lover's voice what the person looks like, when we lose our sense of smell, many of us don't really have any olfactory imagery to fill in the gap. And that's part of why it can be so devastating.
Well, I think what you've done is in addition to pointing out all this amazing research, you really raised more questions than you've answered. So many of these insights are built on old studies that lack the power that we'd like, and you've highlighted that, I think, in your work. And it's just a call for more research, and it's a call for more researchers. So I hope this call is listened to, and we see more people moving into this field. So I'd really love to thank you, Charles, for joining me today.
This is Unsilo, brought to you by Alumni FM, connecting people through stories.